Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome back. Today we have a history stream on my channel on the First Crusades from 1096 to 1099. This came about and I'm joined by Bede. Hello, Bede.
Hello, AI. Thank you so much. God, I think the last time I was on your channel was about a year ago, and we were talking about the Oblivion remaster of all things. So
Yes, it was the Oblivion remaster. Um, and so yeah, welcome back. And so Bede, you recently had an interview with Jay Burden on his podcast, and the title of that was did the did the Crusades happen, or were they real? And particularly on the First Crusade. And from my understanding, because I watched it, from my understanding, he was sort of getting at is like the common layman's understanding of the Crusades incredibly distorted, and is the actually like the real events uh there's been so much like modern myth making behind it that the real events are quite obscure, and I mean uh and don't bear fact to what actually happened. um is that sort of a fair thing? That do you think Jay Burden was going for, of like a
yes,
myth and reality?
essentially, our understanding has become so divorced from what they were actually about that we have a very skewed perspective of them, and I think it leads to very perverse things such as shall I call it Zionist neo-Crusadism, if you will.
So I mean, I think the most obvious understanding, and if I you mention it to anyone on the street, the probably most generic response is, "Oh yeah, it's Christians against Muslims. It's Christians fighting Muslims over the Holy Land." Maybe they won't say the Holy Land, but they would know that they would sort of note that it's Christianity against Islam, um, and that is your sort of basic. And you can see why certain political movements today would try and capitalize on that period in history for, various nefarious reasons, let's say. um I've got a bit of an introduction here, so on the First Crusades, but um obviously just a quick sort of recap here. In 632, Islam, from the Rashidun Caliphate, broke out of the Arabian Peninsula, and through the centuries, they would conquer the Levant, up to Syria, the Persian Sassanid Empire, and of course North Africa, Egypt, North Africa, and the Maghreb, and effectively conquering a very large swath of territory from uh, under the Umayyads into Spain, but yeah, from Spain, North Africa, all the way to the Indus River in India. Um,
But certainly,
and and the important aspect is the places that were conquered, particularly for the Christian populations at the time. Bearing in mind, at this time, you know, Christian nations and people were not as the same as you would think today. At this point, we're talking about um, the Saxons were still pagan. At this point, the Anglo-Saxons in England were starting to convert. You had the conversion. I don't my channel, the King of Kent, um, the King of Northumbria. You had still had the Anglo-Saxon pagan Penda in Mercia, and also in Wessex as well. So at that point, while this was all going on with the Russian Caliphate, you had the sort of emergence of missionary work um, in Anglo-Saxon England. But you, of course, had the Frankish realm in Gaul. You had the Visigothic kingdom in Spain. But beyond that, particularly Western Christianity, which, and at this time, this was before the schism, so it was all um, nominally Chalcedonian Christianity united. It was before Orthodox and Roman Catholicism, as we know it today, of the Latin Rite. Um, though there were tensions between the Bishop of Rome and the Patriarch at Constantinople, due to a mixture of political, I mean, I would say quite heavily political, the fact that the Eastern Roman Empire continued on, and in the West you had the success of barbarian states um, uh,
Well,
and
I'd say
elements.
at this point, most of the major flashpoints in deterioration haven't really occurred yet. I'd say at this point, the main real split is between the Constantinople and Rome, with the kind of Eastern Patriarchate, so that of Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria, which all have Christians that don't follow the nominal Chalcedonian creed. So the most predominant ones are what are known as Monophysites. So these
Yes,
include the Copts, the Egyptian Christians, being the most nominal group, and later on you get Miaphysites, which are the Armenian Christians. But what does Monophysite mean? Monophysite means that those Christians believe that Christ only had one nature, which was a divine nature, whereas the Chalcedonian Christians, later Catholic and Orthodox, believe that Christ has two natures, both divine and human. And it was on that point that they were not recognised by the as part of the Council of Chalcedon, hence the name Chalcedonian Christianity. And when it comes to the actual Islamic conquest, one of the reasons they were so successful is the Christian population of Levant and Egypt were, and even the Nestorian Christians in Iraq and the Persians, are largely ambivalent to the Byzantine or any idea of liberation, because the Byzantines have actually been actively persecuting them and trying to reconvert them back to Chalcedonian Christianity. And ultimately, this is why they're so successful, because what happens is the Muslims come along and essentially they say, okay, under us, okay, we're not Christian, but we will respect your right to practice your faith as long as you pay a tax, and we'll guarantee your
mm,
liberties and property. And according to these Christians, well, fine, we'll bet on the Islamic caliphs. They seem more tolerant of us than, ironically, our fellow Christians are. And there's a very interesting tale about the conquest of Jerusalem, AI, which is when the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Sophronius, realized that it was hopeless. This is in 637 after the Battle of Yarmouk, where the Emperor Heraclius was roundly defeated after a 5-day slog by the forces of sorry, I've forgotten the commander now.
was it
Sorry.
Khalid? Was it Khalid?
Yeah, that's it. Khalid ibn al-Walid. That was it.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah, Khalid, yeah.
Khalid. Yeah, and then that's what allows the Arabs to essentially overrun the Levant. Sophronius surrenders Jerusalem, but he has a condition. He'll only surrender Jerusalem to the Caliph Umar ibn al-Hattab directly. And the Caliph Umar, upon hearing this, says, all right then. And so he and a single servant travel by camel all the way from Medina to Jerusalem, where he personally does accept Sophronius' surrender. And this leads to what historical sources call the Pact or the Covenant of Umar, where Umar enters the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he actually, meets directly with Sophronius, and he confirms that the Muslims and he, the Caliph, will personally ensure the rights, protections, and liberties of the Christians and their worship. And to add to this, is something another very interesting is Sophronius asks Umar to join him in a prayer, and Umar politely declines, stating, "Well, if I pray here, my Muslim followers will declare this Muslim property." And so what he does out of respect is he leaves the church and he prays outside on the steps, and the Muslims then
Yeah.
pray on that land, and that land is now a mosque outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So again, yeah. So though people, no, it's true. There's definitely holy war, jihad, if you like, and there's definitely animosity as time goes on between Christians and Muslims. I just want to elaborate to people that it's not all just hostility and hatred. There is a lot of nuance to the relations between these two religions, even as far back as the actual Arabic conquests.
It's quite interesting because and I've listened to various rabbis of different sects within Judaism and Islam. Whenever they criticize Christianity from a theological point of view, the one thing that they particularly that irks them and they view it as I guess you could say something which has no connection to, the book, let's say, is the concept of the Trinity. And I didn't realize that, uh, a, a Jew and a Muslim can pray in each other's, in theory, they can pray in each other's like mosque or um, synagogue, in theory, but in particularly in uh, the sort of more mainline like Catholicism or Orthodoxy, or where the Trinity is adhered to in some capacity, or particularly in Catholicism, um, it is not allowed, and that is a very big point of contention. Um, and when you go into like the Thomas Aquinas or figures later, when they are sort of like the reason they bring up the Trinity quite a bit is that is a big thing of a point of defense for Catholics to get across. And the purpose of the Trinity is to deliberately show that the Christ is Lord and with God and is God, and everything else to basically cross all T's of any sort of to avoid any more sort of like forms of heresy. And when you look at Christianity, even in its inception, um, from Nicaea, you had the Arian heresy. You've had as you mentioned, various different splits from the mainline view. Um, and so, but that's one thing when I've heard from others from that is a main point of criticism, even to this day, and it was back then.
No, certainly. The Christian Church's unique talent for splitting into various creeds or sects is just never ending, isn't it?
No, it it is, and we'll mention. I might mention quickly because in the build-up, when you with Pope Urban's predecessor, there was there was a period of an anti-pope, but it wasn't like a schism in that sense. But there was um, a political split within the church and the hierarchy of the church. And we know that there's been various splits, but not necessarily on theological grounds, to be honest. But a quick introduction here. So the in 1095, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I appealed to the Christian states of Western Europe for help against Turks who had swept across the empire after the disastrous Byzantine defeat at Manzikert in 1071. The First Crusades that followed saw several armies of pilgrims and professional knights and warriors march across Europe to the Holy Land. They were unleashed on a divided and fragmented Islamic world and won a series of apparent miraculous victories, capturing the holy city of Jerusalem. The success of the First Crusade was never repeated. However, it did trigger a continuous wave and its inspiration for other crusades, um, and has created repercussions of which the world still feels today. Um, and that was a bit from of the book I got here as well, but also some bits I've added in it. And I think we talk about Mansikert. So we did a brief introduction of Islam. Um, we have the arrival of the Seljuk Turks, and the Turks have been, they've been around in European Greco-Roman history for a while. They have been used as mercenaries, as nomadic warriors, as slave warriors, um, by the Eastern Romans, the Byzantines, by the Sassanids, or then also particularly by the Islamic caliphs. And we what was it? Was it the 1050s or the 60s you had the rise of an expansion of the Seljuk Empire, Bede?
Well, it was 1037, if I recall correctly. You have their original founder, who I believe was called Tugril, off the top of my head. He's able to smash the Hasnavids, who are the main sort of Turco-Persian Empire in sort of Iran and Afghanistan and northwestern India, and they're able to conquer pretty much all of Iran, all of Iraq, and start pushing into sort of northeastern Syria and Anatolia under Tughril's son Alp-Arslan. And in 1071, Alp-Arslan. And what's the real tragedy of Manzikert, William, is that it was a completely unnecessary battle, because during these sort of campaigns, Alp-Arslan was mostly focusing on attacking his theological enemies, the Fatimid caliphs in Egypt and the Levant, because the Fatimids were Shia, and obviously the Turks had converted to Sunni Islam. And so what's interesting, because Islam for the preceding century had been dominated by two Shiite powers, the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt and the Levant, and the Buyids, who were a confederation of emirates in Iraq and Iran. And so with the Buyid conquest by the Seljuks and them pushing into the Levant, you start to see what's known as a Sunni revival in Islam, which is being spearheaded by the Turks. And so the Turks coming in, they're mopping up the enemies of Sunni Islam, and the Byzantines at this time, led by Romanus the Fourth Diogenes, they completely misread this and think, we don't really like this large horde coming in and conquering territory near our border. We actually want to secure this territory. So they send an army, and Alp-Arslan sees this as a threat. So he goes to meet them and he tries to negotiate, saying that, listen, I don't want to fight. Let's make peace and we'll go our separate ways. And it's actually the Byzantines who insist that, no, we're going to defeat you, leading to Manzikert. And Manzikert is such a disaster because the Turkic army was largely a mounted and cavalry, horse archers and lancers. And so when the Byzantines went to go and obviously pursue them, they would just withdraw back. But what the Turks did is that when the Byzantines went to go and pull back themselves, the Turks used to harass them with arrows. But so they did this a couple of times. Then when the Byzantines decided to fall back, I think it's the third time, the Turks actually launched a charge, and this completely is a disaster for the Byzantines, because they're led to a mass rout. And what's even more disastrous is the rear guard of the Byzantine army, who's commanded by a member of the Dukid family, which are a powerful Byzantine dynasty who actually produced an emperor earlier in the 11th century. They decide to flee the fields and not secure the rear. And so this is why Manzikert is such a disaster, because you've literally got thousands of men running away in a panic, being pursued by cavalry, and it's a disaster because Romanus the Fourth Diogenes is captured in battle. And so I don't think it's been since I think it was Valerian who was captured by the Sassanids in battle, and by in the third century. So it's like, so that's why it's so significant. And to make it even worse, again, Alp-Arslan was pretty gracious in victory. He said, look, again, I don't really want to push into Anatolia. Okay, now I've captured you and you've ignored me. I'll have to take a bit of territory, but listen, I really want peace. You just give me like some ransom money. And so he sends a emissary off to Constantinople, and the Byzantine elites, many of them who actually hated Romanus IV Diogenes, say, "Oh, he's a traitor. He's let himself be captured, and he's going to hand away territory. So no, sod off." And Alp-Arslan's like, "Oh, fine then," and he just occupies all of Anatolia because there's no army to stop him. And so and this is why it's such a tragedy, because it was just completely unnecessary and could have been avoided even after the battle itself. But stupid elite back in Constantinople.
Do what's funny? I've been reading today the Gesta Francoria and the historical accounts by Anna Komnenoi, the daughter of Alexius. And one thing I always find from both accounts, and even some of like the accounts from it was like, I think, a little letter from the emir of Mosul, who also was documenting this period, is that the Greeks really did not help themselves, and in some ways there was a bit of, from the Crusaders as well, I say a bit, there was quite a lot of just total contempt for a lot of the Greeks, um, in the sense of lack of respect, um, and it was difficult because with Alexius, as you mentioned with Mansuket, there was disaster, and also it was the decades-long effect from that. But also, leading up to the Crusades, the Byzantines' main threat came from the Peshmerga and the Cumans from the north, which is modern-day the Carpathian Mountains. You also had raids from the South Slavs as well that would still continue at this point. And in fact, and then not to mention also, there was a lot of concern with the Hungarian kingdom as well, which also bordered to their north. And so they were completely surrounded, but they really had this very, very incompetent style of governance.
Well, just a couple of points. We mustn't also forget who I think the Bible would have considered their greatest nemesis, which was the Normans in southern Italy, because they'd
Yeah,
been brought in originally as mercenaries to help them in the reconquest, and they turn and betray and end up forging their own sort of duchies, Duchy of Apulia, the Duchy of Calabria, and later the Duchy of Sicily, which eventually
yeah.
coalesced into the Kingdom of Sicily in the about 50 years after this period. And another point as well. Sorry, I forgot the other point I was going to say now.
I was going to say on governance, because one thing and I don't know if this was a legacy of like the Roman style, but when it came to allowing the Turks in, and you did have, and maybe this, I can't really blame Alexios, because this was down on more of a local level, like a governor's level, like a provincial level. You did have, some Turks who would obviously be employed by local forces, Byzantine forces. You had, um, and these would be like the Turkoman nomads who would be occupying the high plateau of Anatolia. And if you see on the map, when they show at this point, all the Turks are in Anatolia, they're in the part of Anatolia which is very, very remote. Even to this day, it's very remote, territory. Um, the road that the Crusaders took across that high plateau that we'll find, I didn't realize there wasn't a proper road built until the 1970s. There wasn't it was still just like a dirt path, and this is where you'd have these nomadic Turkic peoples who would sort of be be sort of flooding into, and they would seek employment and among the Byzantines. There was even reports that Anna Komnene talked about a couple conversions to Christianity. I will say though, during the now this will be a warning actually, for people from Anna Komnene's accounts, because she's the daughter of Alexius. You do have to be a bit careful with her, because she's going to make the family look good, as good as possible in all this. So I that's one thing I
Well, one caveat about her. For those who don't know, obviously Anna Komnene was the daughter of Alexius. One thing that's very important to know about her is that when she was writing the Alexia, this was while she was in a convent, and the reason she was in the convent is she was put there by her brother John, because when Alexius died, she and her mother had been scheming to put her and her husband Nikephoros on the throne and prevent John from becoming emperor. And Alexius always favoured John, and Anna believed she had the right because she was the eldest child of Alexius, and obviously she had her husband, and her mother supported her claim. But Alexius thought, no, John will succeed because I need a man, basically. I need a strong emperor who's going to be an effective military commander. And so what Alexius does is that when he's on his deathbed, he gives his imperial seal, I think, and his crown to John, and tells him to go to the Hagia Sophia and get the ecumenical patriarch to crown him emperor. and he does so, and then I think it's the mother then comes to talk to Alexius, and Alexius tells her what's happened, and she's furious, but she's nothing she can do, and then Alexius dies, and then she and the daughter then still try to overthrow John, but it completely fails, and that's how she ends up in the convent. And so what you'll find is in the Alexia, it's very critical of her brother John for that reason, and it's also so it's very praiseworthy of her father, but anybody who's like she didn't like or opposed to her schemes, she's quite critical of, and that's something to always bear in mind.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. I mean, even the Gesta Francoria, is the same thing, but it is quite important because it does actually well, you got your first-hand accounts, and particularly with the Gesta Francoria, that they it's almost like interviews of you have various unnamed knights and stuff, or that are referenced or cited as well, for like various events and everything. There's one good one where there's I think it's with Tancred and as a Norman knight who sat on the imperial throne in Constantinople, and Beaumont has to sort of like one of the knights sort of like, tells him to get off the throne and stop like messing about, and there's a bit of friction there, and Beaumont has to come in and sort of calm things down because this is happening right in, a great sort of dishonor directed at the emperor. Um, and so there's that, and there's a reference that might have been Tancred, who was Wood Beaumont's nephew of the Normans of southern Italy. Um, that was the one involved in this, which wouldn't surprise me given some of his behaviour that we'll see going forward.
Well, obviously you've got Bohemond as well, who Bohemond was the son of Robert Guiscard, who was the Duke of Apulia. And if there's no Guiscard is from Old French and it means weasel or fox, and because he was obviously very crafty. And Robert the Fox had been launching a series of raids into Greece, trying to conquer Albania. And there's even like an account of a battle mentioned by Anna in the Alexiad, where I think there was some Anglo-Saxon members of the Varangian Guard like fighting the Normans in southern Greece, and there's quite a horrific incident where they retreat into a church and the Normans burned the church down.
Yes, yeah, and one thing you can say with the Normans, and this is one of their greatest assets they brought to the First Crusade, is due to the number of fortified positions um, in Sicily, in southern Italy and Apulia, and against the foes that they would be warring with. It meant that they were very, very adept and experienced in um, attacking fortified settlements, whether it be forts, castles, um, and also in siege warfare as well, but particularly finding a weak spot, getting in there, whether it be ladders or something like that. They were quite experienced in that, and that's something that experience obviously would come to help them uh, during during the First Crusade. Is one of the reasons why they were I well, one that is, and this was something even Alexius recognized, and why, because a lot of people will say, well, why would he allow them to come? And it's like, well, beggars can't be choosers at this point for the Byzantines, really. At this point, beggars can't be choosers. You want to regain your territory. These are the guys who have the best chance, really. And of course, they'd been fighting Muslims in Sicily and southern Italy as well. They've been fighting them um, for themselves, but also for the Byzantines as well beforehand.
No, certainly, I think what we can really establish is that Normans are very good at war and very good at conquering.
They're very good at war conquering. I mean, true. So so I mentioned following Manzikert, you had large, nomadic Turkish and Turkoman tribal people taking control of uh, most of like the high plateau, a large portion of central. and Anatolia. And then, of course, Alexius then seized the imperial throne, um, and quickly brought about like a new unified style government, to deal with what was a pretty poor state of things. And unfortunately, the reason one of the things, and I think this was from, I think it was Nicephorus, his predecessor, that imposed this. Effectively, it was a state of austerity. Now, Alexius did install like a state of austerity when it comes to payments on, um, through the imperial funds to the armies, and paying for the armies and everything. Unfortunately, because of this ruthless cycle, um, for a while now in the Byzantine Empire, you actually had this problem of where they wouldn't be paid, and so you had like these really unreliable governors. I mean, for example, Cyprus was one. You had the at this particular point, you had like the governor of Cyprus who was, um, you know, in it had a small revolt that went on down there. So you had this, uh, you know, and then of course enemies coming from the pagan Pechenegs in Europe, along with the Turks. So it was totally, surrounded, from the Balkans as well. Um,
Something
so
else we should probably talk about is obviously we've got the idea of crusade or a expedition into the Levant to try and reconquer it in the name of Christianity, but it shouldn't be forgotten that there were numerous Byzantine Arab wars. So for the longest time, the Byzantines were on the back foot, but under the Macedonian dynasty, which ruled from about 867 to about 1051, they are able to reconquer substantial territories. They're able to reconquer Crete in the middle of the 10th century. They've also been able to reconquer southeast Anatolia. They would even be able to push into the Levant itself and reconquer Antioch, and parts of northern Syria. And it's one of the great commanders. William was a general called Nicephorus, and later he would actually be made emperor alongside a young Basil II while he was in his minority. And Nicephorus is better known to history by his epithet, the White Death of the Saracens, which is an incredibly based epithet. But yes, you almost have
yes,
this kind of early kind of Crusader vibe in an explicitly Byzantine project to reconquer former lost territories. But now
yeah,
it's a situation of the empire is too weak to do it on its own, and is now having to rely on essentially Western mercenaries to help them do it.
yes. And I think that was quite fortunate because, of course, at the time, um, uh, you had, the likes of Emir, Kaka, who controlled, Izmir, or Romans, or was it Cyrenia, Cyrena,
Izmir, is Smyrna.
Smyrna. Sorry, Smyrna. Yeah, sorry, I was got the wrong one. Um, and then he was killed then by, Aslan the First, who was who would become the Sultanate of Rome, or the Sultanate of Rome, as being Anatolia considered, Roman, due to that time. Um, and yeah, as you mentioned, you had like, John Ducas, who you had like early efforts. So, for example, you had, the one just on the advent of the First Crusades, you had under John Ducas, um, went to regain the islands in the Aegeans, which had been taken over, to by, Kaka. And also, I believe, um, he went on to then crush the governors in Crete and Cyprus who were in open revolt as well. So yeah, you do see, as you mentioned, you do see these, Eastern, I mean, I guess Eastern Orthodox style crusades of recapturing territory, um, or reaffirming control. And but the thing though is, as you mentioned, it isn't enough. for the Eastern Romans. They haven't got the manpower or the, even really the political capital to actually go, because the problems, even you're thinking as the Eastern Roman Emperor, and apparently Alexius suffered from, it's about sort of like paranoid panic attacks, because of course there was schemes against him from his own family. um you had the threat of the Turks and the Islamic world to your east. You had the threat of the pagans and the Pechenegs to the north, and then you had the threats internally from, the actual Byzantine nobility in your own family. I mean, it was a pretty untenable position to be in.
No, and I just think it's incredible what Alexius accomplishes because I think if not for him, I think we could have seen the destruction of the Byzantine Empire several centuries earlier than we did. So
I think you're right, and I think it it almost is like he's able to regain um the actual energy of Rome in some capacity, because when he took power, the problem was you had these rebellious governors, and you had I think in what was described um in one of Anna's pages as a population who was so war weary they didn't really care, whether they be governed by Turks or Greeks or what have you. And he was able to, with by and he knew about bringing the calling out for aid. Um, he was able to do it without appearing weak, even though that this may have been and would have been construed as weak. And he was concerned that this would be, inviting this huge army. His enemies from within may try and use this as a way of staging their own, coup, or even, his biggest threat was the crusading force would try and capture Constantinople itself and depose him.
absolutely, especially when your crusading army includes Normans such as Bohem and Tancred, and someone we've not mentioned yet, but Robert Curthose, who was the eldest son of
Duke of
William the
Normandy, yeah,
Conqueror and Duke of Normandy,
Duke of
who
Normandy,
decides to join the Crusades. And it's interesting because in order to finance the expedition, he had to actually mortgage the duchy to his younger brother William Rufus, the William II of England. So essentially,
yeah,
give me a large sum of cash, and the duchy's basically yours until I get back. So
yeah. And so he mentioned, as I say, then because after Kaka, you had Aslan the First, who was able to, take through somewhat of a diplomatic means Nicaea. And at this point, the boundary of Constantinople to the Turkish Sultanate of Rome was about 50 miles, which is incredibly close. Effectively near enough the whole of Anatolia, apart from Trebizond, Sinop in pockets in the north, and Armenian Sardinia um, in the south, you know, is under control. And but one thing that is quite interesting though, Bede, is pilgrims from the Catholic pilgrims from the West that who regular and there was a regular train of pilgrims who would travel through Constantinople and Anatolia on the way to Antioch and Jerusalem and to the Holy Land and come back. They were finding it incredibly difficult, in some cases unable to directly go that route. But then during this period, particularly with Aslan the First, you had descriptions of Greek populations being effectively um, raids, slaughtered, and mass rapes, is what's described, or mass sodomy. I can't say the word, but mass sodomy of men, women by the Turks. And this is one thing that many priests, and even referenced by Pope Urban himself, that there is this cruel and very vile act being taken against Christians in Anatolia. In effectively, you know, Anatolia is a very important province of the Roman world, area of the Roman world, still technically in everyone's mindset part of Roman territory. I mean, this is it's in more ways it's actually the center for a lot of early Christian sites as well. That the birthplace of the likes of Saint Paul, Saint Nicholas, many Christian figures, and this stories coming back really animates many other clergy to actually talk about the plight of what's going on with Christians, and this sort of creates for Urban this in many sermons talking about the actual horrors that was going on in Anatolia. And then of course you had the and then the Byzantines were aware of what was being said, and so Alexius did the infamous call to Pope Urban requesting aid. And this is when, at this point you have Peter the Hermit, who is a figure we'll come into. He's sort of going around at this point. Um, he claims from first-hand experience to have seen such crimes committed. Um, whether he did actually witness it or not, there's a bit of skepticism by modern scholars. I don't know. I've looked into it, but he may not. I don't know. But Pope Urban would write many letters, but also go and visit and convened a council at Clermont, in modern France. Um, and it is worth noting that when he was on his travels, he did have to be careful not to enter the uh, um, areas of France which was under the direct control of King Henry, I believe, at the time, because he was excommunicated. So this was, you know, the complex and um, decentralized vassal network of France we're talking about here. But particularly, it was Lorraine, it was the Lotharingia, as they would call it in the sources. That sort of like middle area between modern day France and Germany, the Rhineland as well to its east. There were a buzz of information and communication of what was going on, and of course at the Council Clermont. So, Bede, so I've been talking for a bit now. Could you just explain what happened at the Council Clermont, being like the pivotal moment for the Western response?
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, so it was essentially a synod of ecclesiastics and laymen from the church, which had been called by Urban, and this was held between the 17th and 27th of November, and it was at Clermont in Auvergne, which was in France, and ultimately, as a result of this Council of Clermont, the Pope formally reacts to the request by the Emperor Alexius to go and send men east as part of the crusade. And so
Hello.
sorry, I'm here. Sorry. Yeah, no, I'm finished.
Oh right, so sorry. Yeah, to go east, and this one thing that the Pope mentions is that any sort of sin or any um in uh I guess you could say any sort of blot on one's soul, all could be atoned for going on this crusade, as long as you're following the strict guidance of the Catholic Church, which and it's one thing that's mentioned is you had a papal legate who was effectively the spiritual leader of the First Crusade, whose name uh, I, uh, it was Adama of Lipui. um, who was the papal legate. Um, but also it did create this almost viral effect because you had all over Christendom, in particularly in France and in Germany, um, and particularly in the Rhineland as well. You had this where Pope Urban didn't really go because um, the Germans princes didn't really want to take part in this because they felt that there was more threats from, well, from their east, from like um uh the Baltics, and also internal reasons as well. So there wasn't really any um from the Holy Roman Empire as figures. But what you did have was a hermit, Peter the Hermit, who um, preached up and down the Rhineland and gathered a great, force of followers, of men, women, children, even, and this would become known as the People's Crusade. And one of the and this is something that a lot of modern scholars will talk about as a you know a large point of condemnation during this was there were a lot of Jews living in the Rhineland region, particularly in like Mentz and Worms, as like the main two cities in the Rhineland. And because of this being like this religious fervor of the enemies of Christ and everything, um, they were targeted, and there were uh, large scale massacres, forced conversions of children, and I guess you would say it's like a very wide scale uh, program. This was condemned, ironically, by the church at the time, uh, saying that this was a uh, form of just pure banditry, I guess you could say, largely because that um, it resulted in large scale destruction of property, which wasn't just only for Jews as well. So there was like a mix and match of reasons why this was condemned, but it was more like this was a rabble. And also, as Pope Urban said himself, he didn't want, and he had to even tell, like there was a countess, an Italian countess, who stitched on like a golden cross onto her like tunic and dresses and all that, and wanted to go off, and he had to sort of like say in the nicest possible way, like, I like your enthusiasm, but listen, we need professional knights and professional killers on this. We need professional warriors. um and with Peter the Hermit and the People's Crusade, you didn't get that, and they would travel before the main body of the crusade through um, Germany into Hungary, um, and Serbia, and they would be looting Hungarian villages, towns. I think they even sacked Belgrade as well, until they got to Constantinople, and they were ferried across by Alexius, and um, because they were just, there were a few um, soldier like levy type soldiers, but most of them were just peasants with axes or basic farming tools, makeshift weapons, and they were easily cut down by the Turks.
Like lambs to a slaughter.
Pretty much, yeah, and the following on though, you had from Pope Urban, you did have a fairly good response. I think even Pope Urban couldn't predict, actually, and not particularly Alexios couldn't predict the size and scale of response from um, you various lords and princes who would and counts and dukes who would arrive. And so just mention those who took part. So you had Raymond the Fourth of Toulouse, arguably be the most powerful in terms of size and military. One of the very very powerful um, figure on the crusade, um, and is in some ways, and I don't know if this is him, but is regularly he he he, he regularly cites himself as being the actual military leader of the crusade. Um, though it's only him that that sort of like documents that, so I don't. That's a separate thing. Adima of Lipui, who is the papal um, the papal figurehead, the spiritual figurehead. Godfrey of Boulogne, Baldwin of Boulogne, Hugh of Vermandois, Stephen of Blois, Robert II, as you mentioned. Robert II of Flanders, Robert Curthose, Duke of Normandy, uh, Peter the Hermit, who joined with them after that disaster, and then of course the Normans, Bohemond of Taranto and his nephew Tancred, and collectively they would raise a force, and this is where there's a bit of contention of actual numbers. It looked like it would exceed over 100,000, possibly as high as 160,000 men. Um, so a large force for that time. Probably the last time such a number of men have been um, an army, well, relatively united army, would probably go back to Rome, the Rome of old.
Oh, pardon, sorry.
Sorry, did you hear that last bit?
I didn't hear that last bit. Sorry, no.
I said that the culmination of the army was probably exceeding 100,000, up to 160,000 at most. And the last time that Europe had seen such a force would have been that of Rome, of the
Oh,
time
yeah, no, certainly.
of Rome. Um, and on the other side, you had the Emirate of the Rum, the Sultans of the Rum, and also the Danish Medics as well, which was a Turkic tribe to the east. It was of eastern Turkey and northern Syria, I believe, um, and as well as like the other the Seljuk realm. Now the Seljuks, these Sultans of the Rum, you had uh, Kiliji Aslan. Uh, I'm going to be probably mispronouncing some of these Turkish names, so I do apologize. But Yagi Sion and Kurbaga, uh, Dugag, Ridwan, uh, Toftikan, and Jana ad Diwali.
Um,
Um,
so, so just a bit of background with the Turks. So, obviously, you mentioned the Sultanate of Ram and the Danish Men's. Well, part of the reason they're a bit fragmented by this point is obviously after the Battle of Manzikert, Alparslan actually dies a year later at a relatively young age. I think he was actually killed by an arrow during a skirmish, and his son Malik Shah takes the throne of the Seljuk Empire, and he rules for 20 years, and it's largely through the Grand Vizier that his father had appointed, known as the Nizam al-Mulk, or the Order of the Realm, who was a Persian fellow. The empire was very well governed. However, a new menace emerges. So some Ismailite Shia radicals had escaped from the Fatimid Caliphate because in 1092, you have the death of al-Munstasir, who was really the last great Fatimid Caliph, and from then on the Caliphate goes into stagnation and decline, and it's led by a dynasty called the Al-Jamali dynasty, who are the Grand Viziers and commanders of the army who are really running the show. So So these Ismailite Shiites had disputed. They supported a claim of another son for the throne, a son called Nizar, as opposed to the mainline Fatimid claimant, which the Al Jamali dynasty supported. And so this leads to the creation of the Hashashiyah, or the Order of Assassins, in the northern mountains of sort of Mazandaran and chiefly at Alamut, to kind of go on like a long, several decade guerrilla war against the Seljuks. And what's interesting, AI, is that the first sort of major target of the assassins, which was actually Nizam al-Mulk, and there's a very famous tapestry you can find of one of the Fidai, or assassins, killing him. And then, other than his assassination, Malik Shah dies within the same year as well. Nothing to do with the assassin. So the great empire has lost its two sort of chief pillars keeping it up, Malik Shah and the Nizam al-Mulk. And then this leads to the Seljuks fragmenting into several smaller sultanates. So you've got Rum, you've got the Danishmends, and you've got several local rulers fighting over the throne. So essentially, you've got like a several-year civil war between various Atabegs or Turkic warlords. And so the First Crusade, ironically, was perfectly timed, because the two chief Islamic powers, the Fatimid Caliphate and the Seljuk Empire, are both are in either decline and stagnation in the first case, and in civil war in the second case.
Yes, and during this time, because at this time, at the start of the First Crusade, Jerusalem was part of the Seljuk realm, and I believe
Well, no, it was the Fatimids.
was it I thought it was Seljuk, and then the Fatimids took it.
No, so the Seljuks had been pushing into Antioch and Syria, but they hadn't got to like Palestine or Jerusalem. That was still Fatimid territory.
Okay, so the um okay, because I need to double check that. But anyway, um the the Fatimids were did actually try and contact the Crusader force to in some capacity form some, I don't know if it was like an alliance, but some sort of um I guess like a form of alliance, really. I don't know how to describe it. That there, because at this point, just this is like earlier on, so this was before the direct sort of leading a attack against the Fatimids by the Crusaders. But they're I guess saw like a sort of like mutual enemy from with the Turks.
Well, I think it's important to remember that the Seljuk Turks were obviously encroaching onto Fatimid territory and were intent on completely wiping them out. So there was a lot of hostility. But what's interesting is that the Al Jamili viziers, they actually see the Crusaders as potential allies against the Seljuks, and so they actually try to negotiate with them, to hopefully use them as mercenaries to weaken the Turkish advance. But ultimately, that doesn't work, and they come to realize, oh shit, they're actually here to take Jerusalem.
Yes. So yeah, the Crusaders. And also, I just another thing I need to mention actually as well. Hugh of Vermandois. He is the brother of the King of France. Um, so again, you have like this, uh, you know, important figure, even for the First Crusade, along with likes of Raymond Toulouse. So the Crusader force, they make their way. Most of them go through Italy, and then they go down to meet up with the Normans in Sicily, and then they cross the Adriatic to the uh, Byzantine realm and go along that way. Though there are you have Hugh, as I mentioned, he decides to go down through the Balkans and has a pretty rough time in travel because there's a lot of banditry and they're inhospitable sort of mountains and uh, route down through Croatia, Bosnia, and so on, and the locals were quite unfriendly and hostile. So and again, there was another bout of looting by uh, his men. But when they all sort of congregate into making their way through the Byzantine realm, one thing that Alexius was able to do, one of sort of like, I think is quite a sensible move by him, was to have emissaries to ride out and meet the crusading force and to effectively guide to say um, the various counts and leaders, commanders of their armies can come to Constantinople, but they have to come ahead of their armies. I mean, obviously, this was a way to prevent any sort of attempt to take control of the city, but it was also, in my mind, it was also to dissuade anyone from within the imperial court to get the idea of uh, trying to get the Crusaders on side to organize a coup, and particularly um, the imperial emissaries are very much interested in getting Tancred and Beaumont of the Normans, Sicilian Normans, uh, to Constantinople with little to no incident. Unfortunately, though, some of the Norman knights, while traveling, they do like try and steal sheep and end up doing a bit of rustling, but they are convinced to repay locals in that endeavor. So, but apart from that, the other forces were able to keep um, their men in line for the most part, um, and they agreed to enter Constantinople ahead of their armies.
No, certainly, and there's a very famous declaration where Alexius forces them to swear fealty to him, claiming the territory they're invading will be restored to Byzantine rule, or if they're going to rule it, they'll rule as Byzantine vassals, essentially.
Yeah, and Tancred, who um, there were some knights, particularly one, there was some that overlooked. Tancred never actually swore that. And Alexius realized that when a bit later on, when they were just before the siege of Nicaea, and he tries to force Tancred to swear then, and there's apparently a fight breaks out between Tancred and one of the Byzantine captains. They get hands on each other, and Beaumont has to sort of wrestle his nephew off him, and Alexius wrestles his captain off him as well. So it's like a bit of a punch up. But you did have Alexius was focused particularly with the Normans, but others that yes, they would respect the historic claims of the of the places they'll be going to, and they would um, return it to the Byzantine control. The only thing, and this was something that Alexis did have a problem with, though, it was if they had you know the administrative capacity to actually govern this. Once like various towns and cities that would be go back into Byzantine hands, if they actually had the loyalty and the ability of number of men to do that, um, as well as not just what worried on the military point of view. And one thing that you would say with Alexis is he, particularly with Nicaea, he was quite happy for the Turks to stay. The Turkish population in that city and others, he was quite happy for them to stay if they so wished it. Um, and that's good. The next bit we'll get on to because we'll talk about the siege of Nicaea and then we'll go on from there. But anything else you want to mention, Bede, while they're all in Constantinople?
Not really, no.
No. Um, so after swearing and sort of agreeing, um, the I'm just sorry, let me bring up my notes again. the armies begin to cross um, into Anatolia, and Alexios as well, and he sent two of his generals, Manuel Butamitis and Tacticos, to effectively assist with the Crusaders. And of course, as I mentioned, their first major one was to recapture the city of Nicaea, which came under the Sultanate realm with Khalijic Aslan. Um, and it was a very well fortified city as well. It was a very well fortified city, and the Byzantines under Alexios did try to capture it beforehand and were unsuccessful. And they very much viewed that Alexios viewed it, a siege would almost be, or for the Byzantines itself, would be impossible feat to achieve due to um, how impregnable it was to that. Um,
No, because it was obviously a very principal, important city in Byzantine Anatolia, and so it was certainly very important for them to retake. But
mm,
they're able to storm it with Crusader help, and it's reclaimed, and from there on, the Crusaders carry on like their romp through Anatolia, and in the wake of the army's advance, Alexius uses his forces to quickly reoccupy most of the coastal parts of Anatolia, so the northern coast, the western coast, southern coast, and the western sort of littoral.
yeah.
Yeah, and from there we obviously
It,
get the sorry.
I was just going to say very quickly now, the way that it was captured, and this was something that Alexius played on, was, I mean, as you mentioned, yeah, the Crusaders, pretty much the Normans began constructing siege engines and probing at various ports. I think there was one tower in the city which was leaning, which had been damaged from previous fighting. And so there were the sort of general consensus from the Crusaders was that they would attack that particular area. And um, into the siege, I think it was a few days in, Byzantine reinforcements arrived, and so you had this huge force. And during this time, you had one of the Alexius's agents, I think it was called Michael or something like that, infiltrated the city first time and said, "Listen, surrender the city and come under Byzantine rule, and the Crusaders will pass." And they rejected that and said, "No, we'll be able to hold out." And as time had gone on, the sappers um, set fire to the battlements, and that there was this, um, you know, uh, and Alexius discovered that word was getting out of the city, that they were able to communicate with other Turkic emirs as far as Mosul and Baghdad of what was going on, and he was able, with the help of his army and agents, to shut that down, so to really like lock the city off, because there was meant to be a relief force coming, and there was another force which was dealt with east of the city, and this resulted in um, a second infiltration by Michael into the city, who said, "Okay, you are surrounded." They were running out of food, quite desperate. The populace were getting quite desperate as well, and he said Alexius signed a effectively like a written, uh, stamped writ proclaiming that if they surrendered, the Crusaders won't enter the city. You won't, and they won't be sacked. It won't have any of this done. But if you don't, they will enter the city. You will be slaughtered. It will all be sacked, and everyone will die. And they agreed nominally to that surrender. But what Alexius did was he basically held that surrender and organized this almost fake storming of the battlements, where the from the lakeside, the Byzantine force would get get to the would storm the battlements before the Crusader force could muster their men, capture the wall, raise the banner, and in somewhat of a performative way declare victory um, over the city. And in doing so, they were able to not lose face, able to pay off. A lot of the city contained much wealth from the Deshenids and other Turkic rulers before, and so they were handed out equally to the Crusader force. Everyone was quite happy with this, but I thought it was quite a clever political move. Sort of, even though that a surrender had been done, he was able to performatively still show to the Crusaders like, oh, we captured this, and um, Stephen of Blois, in his letter to his wife Adelaide, somewhat confirms this, because there were some crusaders who were cynical enough to notice that this was a bit of a you were able to storm the battlements when no one was there. Yeah, sort of thing. Anyway, Bede, please continue. um
Yeah, so with the advance of the Crusaders through Anatolia, we then have the first of what were the big sort of pitched battles of the First Crusade, which is the Battle of Dorylaeum. So vanguard force being led by Bohemond is pushing into central Anatolia, and so Dorylaeum is just the southeast of Nicaea, just west of Ankara, and he encounters a Turkish force of cavalry, about 6,000-7,000 strong, led by Kilij Arslan and his officer Ghazi Gumishtigin. And yeah, so the Crusader knights and infantry sort of charge, and the Turks sort of keep retreating and counterattacking. And it's looking quite bad for Bohemond because his forces are getting shot to pieces. But reinforcements coming by Roberts, Curtos, and the combined forces are able to drive the Turks off the battlefield. So despite heavier casualties on the Crusader side, they were ultimately able to secure the field and drive the Turks off, and then keep pushing on through Anatolia down towards Antioch, and allowing Alexius to keep retaking his lost territory.
So, Bede, I'm going to do something a bit risky here. I'm going to switch on my camera because I've got a decent battle map here of it. But I'm going to try and do it without doxing oneself as well. But if I do, oh well, it doesn't matter. I'll figure it out. Okay. Can you see that, Bede, at all?
I can, yes.
Yeah, so again, this is the map. I'll try and bring up, hold on a sec. There's a better way to do this and without doxing myself. Let me just bring up, I'll try and find a decent map of this, but we could actually show, like, because it might be better to show the, because if I remember, it's actually the Crusaders are, at this point, they are, is not the entire force. Now, which Crusading force was ahead, who was sort of leading at the head of the expedition? Who were ambushed.
Well, it was Bohemond's vanguard, and he was later reinforced by Robert Curthose. So it wasn't the entire Crusader force. It was their two together was about 20,000.
Okay, so it was those two, and yes, they were. Let's hold on a sec. Let me get the. Oh, this is ridiculous. I can't find it. Don't use Bing. Doesn't come up with anything. Um, okay. I think I found the map that I was looking at. Yes, I have. All right. This might help you with your uh walk, your sort of presentation here. All right.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, so um the the red arrow, the red lines here, is this the Turkish force?
Hang on. Sorry, because the text is a little bit small to read. So from just looking at it, it is a bit hard to see. Hang on, I'm trying to.
It is a bit hard to see. Let me
Okay.
make it.
Yeah, so it looks like it's saying Godfrey is coming in from the west. So yeah, I think the Crusaders are red and the
Okay.
Turks are green.
Yeah, okay, that would make sense. Yeah, so let me just read here. So okay, I got it here. I got it on my book here. So if you see where the Beaumont of Toronto here, so a small force of Turkish cavalry, which was probably shadowing the Crusader march for some time, takes up position on the low hills facing the entrance to the Kura Su Valley. So this is here. Down where Godfrey of Boulogne is, the leading division or vanguard of the Crusader army, marching about 5 kilometers ahead of the second division or rear guard of the Crusader army. It includes not only the Byzantine contingent under Takakos, but also the contingents of Bohemond of Taranto, Stephen Bloy, and Robert of Flanders as well. So contingents from those force. Sec. Let me just see if I can find. Okay, and so up in the actual main site of the battle here, you have the as the Crusader vanguard enters the valley where the Karasu joins the Nain, they see the main Turkish army at their right, straddling the road to Dorylaeum. The Crusaders are probably already aware of a smaller Turkish shadowing force on the hill facing them. Olik Aslan, Sultanate of the Seljuks of Rum, deployed the main Turkish army across the valley of the Nain River, blocking the Crusader advance towards Dorylaeum, probably in its traditional 3 division of a center and 2 wings. The Turks are not visible to the Crusader army until it emerges from the Karasu Valley. That is one thing that the Turks were very common, is they would do. You would have from a cavalry position uh, a strong center followed up by 2 wings. Um,
Oh, hello.
Hello, can you? Oh, sorry, I think I lost. Um, do, do you hear the last bit at all?
I heard you say strong centre and 2 wings, and then you cut out.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say strong center and 2 wings, um, and which was a sort of common tactic for the Turks. Now we see Beaumont trying to order the Crusader infantry to establish a defensive camp um, in this flowery meadow bit, which is in the circular bit here, and this was it in all honesty, due to the position, it's probably the best way to defend against Turkish cavalry. Because, of course, Beaumont realized that his reinforcements would be following up quite close behind. But the problem was, it wasn't until they got within, within striking distance, they actually saw the main Turkish force, just due to the topography and landscape. Um,
Oh no, certainly.
So Beaumont orders the Crusader cavalry to form up facing the main Turkish force to protect the infantry as they establish a defensive camp. So like in a circular, sort of camping formation. Um, The Crusader rearguard under Godfrey of Boulogne and Raymond of Toulouse is approximately 5 kilometers behind the Crusader vanguard. So they are in the map. If I go back to the map, they are down here. They are, down this way, and so they'll be riding up to meet. Let's see. The main Turkish force attacks the line of Crusader cavalry, forcing it back. The cavalry establish a position around as much of the camp as possible, so they are able to surround the camp. Um, one depiction I've seen of one account was because they would be like horse archers, they would be the cat. You would have the Normans with their shields, almost like a testudo, sort of like a circular testudo around this camp, and the Turks would be riding around, trying shooting arrows you uh, into the center of the camp and trying to wear down. But due to I mean, if you see a Norman shield, maybe I'll bring up an image later on, but they were very, very effective, both on horseback but also on foot as well. And of course, at this point, they were quite dismounted um, in that circular formation.
No, certainly. So it's a bit like perhaps what Crasher should have done at the Battle of Carrhae.
Yeah, yeah, basically. Um, do you know what? I know this is going to be like awful comparison because it's very two different time era ages and everything, but this is kind of what Custer does when he's fighting the Sioux.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if this is what Custer's thinking, like, oh, I'm going to pull a Beaumont here and it'll work, because like Custer, he had the reinforcements that were meant to come and help. They were unfortunately with Custer that didn't happen, and fortunately for Beaumont, it did. So yeah, um, so the Turkish shadowing force that was uh, um, attacks the other side of the Crusader camp, which wasn't protected by cavalry. So they were sort of more higher up on the top of the valley hills there, and they were able to come down and attack them from an unprotected point. Part of the Turkish force uh, probably swings left to find and attack the rest of the Crusader army. So at this point, they're kind of the Turks are now within the camp. They're sort of penetrating the formation of the camp, and there's a big risk, as you can see in the map. If I bring it up here, you see them coming in. They are at risk of coming in behind the knights, behind the Crusader force, and behind Beaumont to take him out. And the Turks attacked the Crusader stragglers, perhaps mistaking them for the remainder of the Crusader army. These stragglers are largely massacred, but most of the survivors probably flee back to the Crusader um, rear guard. So these were those caught outside the formation, and they're able to go all the way back to meet uh, uh, Raymond or Toulouse. So they're sort of like several miles. They're sort of been hampered and shot at and able to sort of retreat back to. Um, the Crusader rearguard, learning of the battle, hurries forward to support the vanguard. Uh, Upon seeing this, the detached Turkish forces probably fall back to ahead of Godfrey of Boulogne's contingent, um, though they were unaware of the existence of further Crusade contingent under Raymond of Toulouse, um, rushing ahead to rejoin the force. And this was a mistake by the Turks because they didn't think they thought the rest of the Crusader force were actually quite a distance away and didn't realize that they were effectively entering the battlefield itself. Um, Godfrey of Boulogne and his division reached the battlefield first, forming up on the right of Beaumont of Taranto and the cavalry of the Crusader vanguard, the Turkish main force pulls back and turns left to face the threat posed by Godfrey to Godfrey Bond's contingent. Um, and let me just find here. Um, yeah, so the Turkish army flees after its flank is turned by the sudden appearance of Raymond Toulouse and his contingent through the drumlins. So Raymond is able to come round and pretty much attack from the Turkish rear, where it was completely unprotected, and it caused mass panic and a very quick fleeing from the battle. And that's the I see that's the Battle of Derulaeum. Any thoughts, Bede?
Well, no, it was a bit bloody on both sides, but ultimately it was crucial that they could then secure Anatolia to push on to the rest of the conquest in the Levant. The only thing I would say is I think Dorylaeum does show the limitation of the Turkish sort of horse rider tactics, because effective as they are, the problem is that if you're dealing with a force that is greatly numerically superior, that isn't going to flee, then yeah, they're ultimately going to weigh you down through attrition.
And also, if part of this contingent, you had Norman knights who were present and also as reinforcements. And I think this is something again, we mentioned earlier on, the Normans were excellent. They really were excellent warriors, and the Turks, maybe having it a bit easy in the past with their foes, the Norman knights, particularly on horseback, were of equal match, and it they were able to, as we see, were able to hold their own, and then when come in as reinforcements, smash the Turks, causing this panic. And um, this is something that um, it was able to secure them the entire access to Anatolia, and as you say, go on to Levant, because at this point, you have the uh, emirs in Mosul and as far as parts of Persia, who and Syria as well, and Damascus, who were writing of how concerned they are upon hearing of the battle, of actually how concerned the Crusader force might, effectively that any sort of organized military, large scale military opposition had been would be well had been wiped out, and of course there was I think there was some sort of hysteria maybe among some of the Turkic sort of people commenting on like the number of crusading force. I think there was a hope that from the um, Seljuk world, that the emirs would put their differences aside, like the Christians of the West did, and maybe organize a you know wider strike back. But at this point, we'll be moving on to the Levant, particularly Antioch. Uh, Oland B in chat. Maybe I will just address this quickly. On the risk of digression, what were the logistics of these adventures? How did the Crusaders water feed and blight themselves? Um, from my understanding, a large deal of the provisions were, I mean, I say large deal, near enough all were provided by the Byzantines, and then when they would go on further, you particularly by the Armenian population in the east as well would definitely help as much as they could, but also just like foraging. Um, I
Yeah,
think
I've got
Bede is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say I've got nothing to really add to that, but carry on.
Yeah, foraging. As we get later on, though, there the Crusade army does go through some level of hardship where there is a problem with, you know, a logistic problem, particularly towards the end here. So let's stop sharing a sec. So, Bede, will we should we go on to talk about the um siege of Antioch? So the Crusaders, uh, do there start to appear divisions at this point among the captains in the Crusade, or the commanders, sorry, in the Crusades?
From my understanding, they were largely united. Though in terms of divisions, I can't really speak to many because I think ultimately they broadly agreed, yes, we want to liberate Jerusalem and capture as much territory as we can. And of course, I don't think we want to give too much to Alexius, especially because they think, well, all of this um, risk is what we're taking and not him. And around this time, we do see the beginning of what's known as a Byzantine duplicity when it comes to the Crusades, because Alexius, despite promising that he would sort of help reinforce them, after they moved down to Antioch, he does not follow them down, and largely this was because that he believed that he needed to secure what he could of Anatolia, in case the Sultanate of Rum launches a counterattack. Um,
Mm.
but it's been speculated by historians that this was a mistake because after losing Dorylaeum, I think they were largely licking their wounds, and that he probably could have sent troops and an army down with the Crusaders, and he possibly could have imposed more control over them and extracted more concessions. So perhaps a bit of an error on his part to not pursue them.
Yes. Um, I do think so as well. That actually on that, and there's not much in reading the sources that go on, maybe the reason why, but so I got a passage here from a book on the First Crusade. So the Crusaders began to run short of. This is actually to answer the logistics question, chat a bit more. Run short of war horses and baggage animals during their long march across the Anatolian plateau. As yet, there seemed to have been few tensions between the Crusaders and the Byzantines, but things may have started to go wrong when the Crusades divided east of Heraclea. It was here that a small Crusader contingent led by Baldwin of Boulogne and Tancred turned south, following the ancient pilgrim road through the Cilician, the Cilician Gate Pass into the coastal plain of Sicilia. This would be Armenia, Sicilia. So this would be populated by Armenian Christians. Um, Whether it was intended as a reconnaissance in force or a diversion, or merely a matter of land grabbing by these sort of junior leaders uh, in the Crusaders, unclear. It's also worth noting Tancred at this point he hadn't actually sworn on holy relics to Alexius, so he was very much a junior figure in this. Um, and he actually the Byzantines allowed um, the Byzantine command general Tacitus would be granting sort of particularly when it came to taking towns like Tartus and stuff. He would um, organize, you know, town hopping, I guess you could say, from one town to the next, liberating town and what have you. And any sort of movement from the Crusaders of force would have to be approved through him from like town to town and everything to be all be organized, not so much approved, but organized through him. And Tancred sort of was like, and maybe with Baldwin as well, but definitely Tancred was like, screw this, and basically said, screw this, I'm going my own way, and sort of like, and apparently uh Tacitus basically forbid, sort of said, no, you can't go south, and he just went, nah, screw it, I'm going, and just sort of just totally disregarded him, and went south along the Pilgrim's Road towards Antioch. And it's the crusading force were going to go there anyway at one point, but Tancred decided to go there first. And in some ways, there is like this quite funny account between him and Baldwin of like trying to get to Antioch first and end up sort of pulling these somewhat hostile moves of trying to leapfrog the other, and sending off like some of their men ambushing each other, and little skirmishes breaking out. And this is what a lot of historians would say, well, this sort of demonstrates um, sort of an element of like land grabbing stuff. But in some ways I can I think from not so much Baldwin, but with Tancred, he really had for him most of the honors and sort of wealth and title was going to his uncle, to Beaumont, and so he was, from his point of view, he was sort of risking a lot like all the others were, but having very little to gain from this. And maybe there was an element of wealth and everything, but I think for him, he was more looking for prestige. He wanted to be the one to take, you know, to arrive at Antioch and take it and everything. I think in his mind, he wanted to do that.
No, certainly. And what does happen is Armenians inside the city persuade the garrison's commander to surrender, and Bohemond enters and he's proclaimed the Prince of Antioch, much to the chagrin of Alexius, because again, Antioch had been a former Byzantine possession, which they'd lost twice, once during the original conquest and again after Manzikert, and especially it being a seat of one of the five patriarchs. And so what would be a running tension between Antioch and Byzantium was over because the Prince of Antioch wanted a Latin patriarch, whereas the Byzantines preferred a Greek one for obvious reasons, and so that was a long-running issue as a result of that.
Yes. Um, so yeah, I've got a bit of a quote here. So the territory of Antioch was ruled by Yaki Cyan, um, and the talks about here about a disappointment that the problem with Antioch's largely Christian population, and this is from the Islamic scholar Ibn al-Athi. Athi, when Yakasian heard of the Crusaders' approach, he was not sure how the Christian people of the city would react. So he made the Muslims go outside the city to dig trenches, and next day he sent Christians out to continue the task. When they were ready to return home at the end of the day, he refused to allow them in. Antioch is yours, he said, but you will have to leave it to me until I see what happens between us and the Franks. Who will protect our children and our wives? They said. I shall look after them for you. So they resigned themselves to their fate and lived in the Frankish camp for 9 months while the city was under siege. Um, talk about a bit of a gypsy switch there. Like, I kick you out the city, as I'll look after the.
Certainly. And carry on, please.
Um, and I mean, from the Turkish point of view of Yaki Sayan, this was a form of hostage, because effectively, and this is what he sort of would led, is that I've got your families, I've got the Christian population, I've got your families here. So if you plan on helping the enemy or doing anything, it's kind of like this implicit threat of we'll just do something to your family. So there's kind of like this. There's nothing much that the men, particularly the Christian men of Antioch, could do. They're stuck outside. And as you mentioned, they are just hanging around the either villages, surrounding villages, or the Crusader camp. There's nothing much they can do at this point. Um,
No, certainly, but something we also need to talk about is other than the establishment of the Principality of Antioch, we also have the establishment of the County of Edessa, which is the going to be the fiefdom of Baldwin, who the brother of Godfrey, and he actually marries an Armenian woman to sort of cement his rule of the area. So you have the already two Crusader states, Edessa and Antioch, as they then from that base would push south towards Jerusalem.
yeah. Yes. So just finish off with Antioch quickly. There was a Turkish relief force that came to assist with Antioch, and at at this point, the Christian army, which was outnumbered, and this is where it's a bit vague of what happened, but this is from like various monks' accounts to this, that there was this like depictions of angels and Saint George and Saint James in the sky and everything, and the Crusader force charged the Turkish force, even though they're outnumbered, and this caused a panic, and quite literally the Turks ran away, or went into full blown retreat. Um, and upon seeing this, the Turks in the city uh, realized that the sort of game was up. And as you said, Antioch was captured and established, and then the county of Edessa as well, by Baldwin of Boulogne. I'm just going to see if I can find the passage for that, if I can. If I can't,
Well, while you're
it
looking for that, I might bring up something actually, because a book I've been reading recently, which gives I think a bit of an interesting perspective on the Crusades, is a book called The Crusades Through Arab Eyes by Armin Malouf, and it was a book one of my subscribers on my channel recommended to me, and I've been enjoying it thus far. And just to give a bit of context, so Armin Malouf, so he's a Lebanese writer and historian. He's actually a Maronite, so he's Catholic by confession, but of course he's an Arab, and obviously it's his mother tongue. And so the Crusade for Arab Eyes is essentially, he says it's a narrative of the Crusades, but from the other side. So an Arab and an Islamic Arabic perspective, and he gives a very interesting interpretation of the events, because obviously many people in the West think, the Christians of the Levant must have seen the Crusaders as liberators, and he says, well, no, not really. And what's interesting is that the Islamic term for the Crusades is the war events called Jihad al-Sanusiya, or the War of the Cross. That didn't really emerge until the 19th century. Much earlier, they simply just called it, the conquest or the invasion of the Franj. Franj is the Arabic word for a European, and it's derived from etymologically from the term Frank, because obviously there were a lot of Franks or Frenchmen leading the Crusades, and so since then the Arabs, even those who were Christian, didn't see the Crusaders as necessarily co-religious liberators. They saw them as foreign occupiers who were just coming, you're here, to sort of plunder our lands and extort taxation from us, essentially. And so again, it's just, I think it's a very interesting interpretation of the Crusades that you're not used to, and I think gives a lot of food for thought.
No, absolutely, and one thing. So after the siege of Antioch, the capture of Antioch, there was um well, I was going to say like a meeting of the commanders what to do next. Um, the Robert Curthose and Tancred agreeing to become vassals of Raymond uh, the Fourth, um, and then of course Godfrey supported his brother's territories in Edessa, refused to do the same. At this point, I believe some of the like Hugh of Venois started a couple started to leave. They sort of Antioch was enough, and so they started to return home with their forces. Um, I think it was Hugh and maybe someone else. I can't recall now. Um,
It's true, but ultimately the 4 or 5 main leaders, so Robert, Beaumont, Godfrey, Baldwin, and Raymond, they all push on.
yeah, they all push on. Um, and the Raymond dismantled the walls of Marat al Numan, um, uh, which is or Aleppo, I believe. It's Aleppo today. So this was like further marching in the area south to assert control, and then uh, uh, Godfrey, along with Robert II of Flanders, who refused vassalage to Raymond, joined the remaining Crusaders at uh, Latakia and marched south in February. Um, Beaumont had originally marched out with them, but quickly returned to Antioch in order to consolidate his rule against the advancing Byzantines. Um, Tancred joined up, left Raymond and joined up with Godfrey. Um, and a separate force was created from Godfrey and was led by Gaston IV of Bern. Um, and This was at a time as well when the spiritual leader Adama had died during this point, and so effectively their spiritual leader had died. I mean, you still had Peter the Hermit who was still hanging around with them, but at this point, they had he had died. Um,
I know
but they
certainly,
did.
but
Oh, sorry, continue.
yes, well, ultimately from there, after the conquest of Antioch, the remainder really sort of pushed south and to siege Jerusalem proper in 1099.
Yes. Um, and the problem was at this point when they got to Jerusalem, there wasn't enough trees to build siege um, machines. There wasn't, you know, really much cover. There wasn't any arable land, and the Fatimids had poisoned wells and driven animals away, and even destroyed farms and things on the outskirts. So there wasn't. It was quite an inhospitable um, place to siege at this point. Um, do you want to take away the six? I talked about the last couple siege conflict. Do you want to take it away?
Yeah, well, when they arrive, it was quite desperate because there was only about 13,500 men left of 12,000 infantry and 1,500 cavalry, and obviously they were lacking in supplies, and obviously because they didn't have enough wood for constructing siege equipment, they kind of had to take the city by assault, and so perhaps it was, I think, a combination of sort of desperation and fervor that really motivated them, and ultimately, after a few different ways of attack, they finally make the final assault on the 13th of July, and they were able to break through and take over the city, really against all odds, because I mentioned earlier about the Al-Jabali viziers, not sure, believing they could negotiate with the Crusaders. They were a little bit slow at sending a relief force to Jerusalem, and so that's one of the reasons that they succeeded, is that only the initial defenders inside the city, there was no reinforcing army coming in to help, and they'll ultimately cultivate a short while later, where the Crusaders would intercept a large Fatimid force at Ascalon. There's the Battle of Ascalon, and that in itself was another a surprising victory, because the Fatimids outnumbered the Crusaders quite substantially. But while they were sort of encamped, they kind of sally out and sort of launch a preemptive strike and send them into a panic and flee.
Yeah, and they were able to build siege equipment because you had Genoese ships which arrived. I think it was off the coast, and what they did was where they disembarked, they pretty much deconstructed the ship and any of like the wood, and just carried it across land to the besieged city, and were able to build um, siege equipment for that. And it's a shame because I got a map here, but I can't show it on screen because it's too um, it's I can't find the online version. It's too small. But what is showing is hold on a sec. Let me do what I did last time. A second. I don't know if you want to comment on that. So I don't know if you can see that, Bede.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is a pretty good. And what you can see is the surrounding of the city here, um, and the the main Christian force, Crusader force, they are sort of stationed to um, the sort of northwest at the Damascus Gate and sorry, the west, I should say, at the Damascus Gate and the Christian Quarter, and then um, Raymond comes from uh, towards the other side of the city from the Zion Gate, um, and yeah, in the end, they're able to penetrate through the from the Christian quarter, and of course from the Jewish quarter, and pretty much take the city. And during this time, and this is something, and I didn't. I actually, while doing my research into this, it's former President Obama talked about it, about like the maybe this was his like you know like like hug a hoodie sort of version. I don't know, from him, or sort of normalizing dialogue, but sort of talk about the brutality of this as of Christians against Muslims and Jews. But yeah, when they stormed the city, um, yeah, there was a massacre. That they did massacre. Now, of course, I would say that some of the accounts, when they said like the entire streets were, knights, Norman knights were up to their knees in blood. Well, I mean that is a bit of a hyperbole. That's not the case, but there definitely was a series of massacres against the population. It's also worth noting that more likely than not, and this was the author that I've got here, that was um, David Nicole, who sort of does try and point this out a bit. He said there's a good chance that a lot of Christians were also killed during this as well, or just caught in the middle of this. You know,
Well, from what I've read, the Christians largely escaped the violence. That's because before the siege, they'd been expelled, because I think the Islamic governor viewed them as possibly as a fifth column, essentially. So they actually escaped the slaughter largely for that reason, and it was largely only the Islamic population that were cut down.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because he sort of says that there was still maybe some that hid the faith or pretended sort of like to stay or something, but um yeah, they were able to decisively take the city, and of course a big symbol was the capture of the Alaska Mosque, but also the Dome on the Rock and the site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the temple, the Temple Mound as well, which was uh, you know for um, I guess for the spirit of the Crusades is probably the high point, um, in all sense. I would say it's definitely the high point.
Absolutely, as I said, I think it was a really an amazing feat that, as I think by all accounts, the First Crusade should have been a failure, but it succeeded. I think due to a combination of luck, um, opportunity, and also just a true grit and determination by those involved.
Yes. It's funny here that when it comes to, I was going to say a quite good illustration of probably what this is like. They said what went down uh, in the fight in the sort of the capture here. And it probably is worth noting, a lot of the Normans, particularly, those not just from Sicily but also from Normandy itself, knights of Germanic origin. I mean, they were, um, you know, the reason they were called barbarians, and they were very brutal. I mean, and I think one thing that does annoy me with the sort of current dialogue is that this was some like unique sort of vengefulness and evil. In some ways, I can understand where that comes from, but at the same time, this is like when you read, like, say, the old accounts of the Merovingians, like when um one of the very Merovingians who went off to like murder his entire family just to secure the throne, like when he battered like a baby to death and chucked it off a rampart, or stuff like this, when you say, okay, that is like pretty extreme. And this is when they were like Christian as well, mind you. Or when you look at you know various Viking raids, or Anglo-Saxon conflicts and stuff, you do see stuff like this. It isn't there's a sort of like rose tinted view of this, that like, oh no, this is like some like great Western evil, and it's just like they would behave like this if they were conquering any other city. In my view, if this was like um whether it be pagan or
I
something.
mean, we mentioned obviously several Normans are involved. I mean, bloody hell, this is like, hello, the harrying of the North.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, like the harrowing of the North. Or stuff when the Normans would the Normans would do this against, you know populations in southern Italy. There's long examples of this. um and yeah, this is just what happens, when you don't want to be on the losing end of a Norman conflict, because this sort of stuff would happen. um but
No, exactly. Um, yeah, obviously we're going about 2 hours, and I need to go very soon, so we should probably wrap
yeah,
this up.
we'll wrap this up.
Um,
Yeah.
so final comment really is obviously after Ascalon, obviously after this massacre, what happens is the Crusaders proclaim the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and they proclaim Godfrey of Bouillon as the prince, and who he refuses to take any kind of royal title, and says, okay, I'll be advocate of the Holy Sepulchre. However, he
Yeah.
would die a year later, and his brother Baldwin, the Count of Edessa, would succeed him and would take the crown as the first king of Jerusalem. And then,
Yes,
of course, and
he
then what
wasn't
the
as humble. He wasn't as humble as his brother.
no,
In-
no.
yeah.
No,
Uh,
but what happens is the Crusaders then focus on spending the next 20, 25 years consolidating the coast, because by this point, the only port they really had was Antioch. So they obviously conquered Tripoli, establishing the county of Tripoli as the sort of final Crusader states. And then those are the four that you have for the foreseeable future until you get the fall of Edessa in 1145, which precipitates the Second Crusade.
Yeah, to from the in the and that's will that be another episode, another day. Um, and also in the final bit as well that Pope Urban during all this he died. Um, during the just after the capture of Jerusalem, but because of communication at that time, he never heard. He wasn't aware of Jerusalem's capture, and the success of the Christians during that. So, uh, but in many ways, because this was, you didn't really have any kings. You didn't have kings involved in this, but because of the success and the incredible success, as we mentioned, and um, in some ways, actually rolling back, you know, the very earliest Islamic conquests of Christian lands and key sites to the Christian faith, places like Antioch and Jerusalem, and so on. They were um, it inspired future generations of kings and emperors to embark on these sorts of level of crusades for prestige, but also to keep the true faith dominant over the whole land. And I will say, not to get political on this topic, but there are many people today who use the iconography and the heroic spirit of those crusaders for current purposes. And I can tell
Pete
you,
Hegseth.
yeah, him being one, if the likes of Tancred or Beaumont or those Norman knights who entered the Jewish quarter that I mentioned just a second ago and showed images of, if they were to hear about, you know, you Pete or you Tommy or any other dipshit like that, and using their memory to support who, I can guarantee you they would they would you would be getting a very quick swift axe to the face if you ever
Um,
came.
no, and there's the thing. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I said this on the interview with Burden, but it's interesting that you've got all these people saying, "Oh, we need to go and fight for Israel in the Middle East," and it's like Israel recently over Easter barred Catholics from having their Easter celebrations in Jerusalem for the first time in what centuries? I mean, and what's the whole reason for the Crusades? It was because the Islamic rulers, the Fatimids, were harassing and detaining pilgrims to the holy sites, and so it's just interesting, isn't it, that the same thing happens now? And no, we must go and do a crusade for Israel. There was an anti-Christian force occupying the Holy Land.
Well, exactly, and again, there's just a sort of clear reminder, and it's uh, I mean, this is a point of theology, but the way that these people are different from the people you just mentioned, is for in their mind and their understanding of the world, that the only God that they understood, that any concept they understood, is the God that are and divine through Jesus Christ and the Roman Catholic Church. Any other religion that's that tried to attach itself to that, well, it didn't anyway, but anything outside that was their enemy. Um, and I I don't like. I mean, even like from my point of view, Bede, I don't like using the Crusade. I've never like tweeted anything or larped as Crusader because I am historically consciously aware that that is like we modern man like us, even we can't replicate that sort of mentality because they were on a totally different understanding of the world than we are as modern men. Wouldn't
No,
you think so,
exactly.
Bede?
I mean, ultimately, because I recently reread there's a Julius Evola essay called "The True Meaning of the Crusades," and for a lot of those men, the Crusades was like it's like a heroic journey of of masculine chivalry, where you would go off and become a great hero or a knight.
Yeah,
And to an extent, Evola said that was the same for the many Muslims. People, there was a reason that Richard the Lionheart and Salah al-Din during after the First Crusade respected each other so much, because they both were their own respective sides and sort of chivalrous king ultimately.
absolutely. I mean that's why you know Tancred, who's sort of seen as a bit of a troll maker and villain, he ultimately wanted he wanted honor, he wanted to be recognized, and that's why he would go off and disobey Alexios and even his uncle in some degree. That is why he would go off and do that, and why many knights would other knights would sort of do that as well, because this is it wasn't just through the spiritual need, they can also fulfill their own honor and glory as well as warriors. Um, and of course, that legacy would create certain military orders like the Templar Knights, um, which would be formed, Knights Hospitaller, and I mean, a bit later on, the Teutonic Knights as well, Knights of St. John. So you'd have many, many knightly orders, which would feature in future crusades to a point, but also in defense of the Christian lands as well. Again, unfortunately, the Templar Knights have been um, they've fallen victim to many, many popular culture um,
Well,
fantasies.
ultimately, well, fundamentally they fell victim to Philip the Fair, the Lauradith, the Iron
Well,
King.
they fell victim to usury, to their own mercantile usury behavior. um,
Well, no, I'm more cynical. No, because Philip Fair, he abducted the Pope at the time using his chief minister Guillaume de Nogaret, and by forcing the popes to sit at Avignon for like the next what, century and a bit. And obviously, with the Pope hostage, he was able to get the required papal dispensation to declare the Templars a heretical organization, and then lo and behold, Philip seizes all their property. Oh, how convenient!
yes, and I think that's where the Friday the 13th stuff comes from, as like bad luck or something like that. Because I remember reading about that, the downfall of the Templars and everything. Um, so yeah, um, I was gonna say yeah, you got Templars and everything. So anyway, B, thanks for joining me. A reason I did this is I wanted to give a very like detailed historical account of the Crusades, particularly for people who um, 'cause I think, as I say, most people's understanding of it, is like I think particularly like the Third Crusades, or very like generic sort of understanding of what the conflicts were about. Um, and I hope people watching the Jay Burden interview, particularly some who may have been either a bit confused or unfamiliar with the First Crusade, at least. Um, something like this, they can then watch this and maybe watch other documentaries and purchase books out there to go into you know further detail and actually look. 'Cause I will say I think the First Crusade would be an epic story, and if it was done right, an epic film, novel, TV show. But the trouble is, I don't trust any more. I think unless I was writing it, I don't think anybody. I think it'd be very difficult to actually get at the heart of the spirit of it all. That would be the problem.
I mean, 21 years ago we had Kingdom of Heaven, and that's flawed enough. I mean, uh, you get
Yeah.
Kingdom of Heaven again, but somehow even more subversive.
Oh, the trouble is they just make the Crusaders the villains. They'll just make them the villains. They
They're
ridiculous.
basically already the villains of Kingdom of Heaven. So
I know. It's kind of like, well, what's the purpose of Orlando Bloom? I mean, they might as well just made it from like a Muslim point of view at that point. I do you know what I liked is I actually enjoyed Kingdom of Heaven when I was a child, but as I got older and I watched it, I actually I hate it now. Do you know what? But do
yeah,
you know
I
what I
was.
hate?
It's funny because I was the same. I loved it when I was younger, and then when I did more reading, I've realised, oh, this is a horrible film.
And what I hate about it the most is the set, the cinematography, and
Oh,
even the clothes.
what you don't like that bit?
No, no, no. What I mean is the clothing, all that is great. It's actually great. Like by like Hollywood standards and like filming standards, it's the actual like design and everything is fairly accurate in that sense. It's fairly on point.
Yeah, so essentially, all of the kind of the artsy parts of the film, so the costumes, the sets,
Yeah,
the music, the visual effects, all of that is top notch. That's fantastic. It's just the rest of the bloody film that's awful.
I know, which is terrible. Like if it had like crap like designs and stuff like that, I'd whatever, like the Vikings TV show or whatever. Okay, yeah, you can get over that, but it's kind of like the script writer, the screenwriter, the director, obviously more than anyone else, but all of that was just let down. They could have actually told like a really decent story, instead of virtue signaling of how much they hate Western civilization, how much they revere the savage, or their version of Muslims. I actually, because people talk about like the depiction of Christians in that film, I think the depictions of Muslims in that film is absolutely terrible. I think it's very basic. It's very neocon sort of minded. It's ridiculous.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you though. I think the depiction of Saladin and the Muslims I'm relatively okay with because again, I don't have a problem with a sympathetic depiction of what the Muslims' thoughts of the Crusades were or what they were doing. That's fine. My problem is that the absolutely uncharitable depiction of most of the Crusaders.
No, 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 what I mean by my depiction of the Muslims, I actually think they are, um, they sh I think they're depicted as too soft. I think I wanted them depicted to be a bit more, you know, stronger and assertive, in as they were. But I agree that I mean particularly it's the Guy of Liscon. He is like, I guess he is the villain of the film, isn't he?
Oh yeah,
If there is a villain.
Gidi Lussinger, yeah.
Guy Liscon,
I
yeah.
mean, the real Guy was a bit of a scumbag, but yeah, I do really think they're like amping that up to 11 in the film.
I mean, but he's sort of like he's depicted as like this like incompetent soldier, and I will say, yeah, he maybe wasn't a good commander, but as I talked about on Iron Duke stream with William Marshall, he captured William Marshall. Like he actually captured like the best knight, what's considered the best knight in Europe. He was a good warrior. He was a. I'm sorry, he may have been a crap commander, and a bit of a questionable fella, and a bit and a bit dishonourable, but he was a good warrior as well. He wasn't a pushover. He's sort of seen as like a Orlando Bloom sort of grabbing his whip. Like if that actually happened with Guy, it would have been a sword to a thrust to the chest sort of thing. It did, yeah. But
Yeah, Mark Circus gives him a very, very foppish performance. You sit at my table.
yeah, yeah. I mean, bear in mind, this is the guy who like captured and tortured like because again the other thing is Orlando Bloom's character, he would know who Guy was. He pretending like he didn't know who he is. Everyone would know who that was because of you know, that I mean, he tried to kidnap the Queen of England at that point. He was quite a well-known robber baron, if you will. He was quite, I think, I think he could have been a villainous character, but like an anti-hero. But this idea that Orlando Bloom's character didn't know who he was not true. Everyone in that time would have known him.
No, no, exactly.
Anyway, Bede, thanks for joining. Thank you for people in chat as well. Thank you, Rud Rud Three Tree and Patterson as well. Thank you for your comments here. And we'll see you all next time. Maybe we'll do a second crusade. We can do the second crusade at some point, and talk about the not just the Holy Land, but also the capture of Lisbon.
Yes, an
As
important little side quest they did on the way.
Yeah, and the formation of the infamous English-Portuguese alliance.
No, that wasn't until the a couple of centuries later.
Was that the couple centuries later?
Yeah, it was the House of the Viz when John the First marries Philippa of Lancaster, the daughter of John of Gaunt.
Yeah, and you have English and Scottish and Flemish knights in that one, and also, I mean, the start of the Second Crusade was also the Northern against the
No,
pagan.
no, that was about 100 years later, I believe, when the Teutonic Knights show
No,
up.
no, they it was what was it? It was the pagan Sorbs
Oh,
at
okay. So,
Stettin. At
oh,
Stettin, yeah, it wasn't. It was like the area west of Pomerania.
oh,
Um,
sorry. So northeastern Germany, so not Prussia. Sorry. Okay.
no, I call them Balts because at that time it wasn't populated by Germanic people. It was still like small pagan tribes, and it was Duke Henry of Duke Henry the Lion who led with that one, even though it ended up a bit of a shambles, and then the Danish swept in afterwards. And it's that's considered it's considered a failure, but I mean the Danish took control of that area anyway briefly, so there's not much on that, to be honest. It was a bit of a uh, because they ended up killing Christians in that one, but it was seen as just a land grab by German counts.
Oh no,
So
certainly.
yeah, so you got that to go through. Anyway, thank you, Beads, and thank you, everyone. I'll see you all next time.
Good night.